Hello, everyone, from wherever you are in the world. Star Scholar Network Training is delighted to engage in dialogue with you. We look forward to this meaningful conversation.
Hello, and I'd like to get us started with a quick question directed at Dr. Chris Glass. What are some professional development opportunities that Star Scholar Network is providing? What could its member take advantage of more than you have seen them doing now?
Great, thank you so much for asking me, and I appreciate the opportunity to connect with all of you. I think that word connection is really what brings us together today. I'm going to share a few opportunities, some concrete ways for you to find your own path into the Star Scholars Network. I mean, there's a reason we're the largest and fastest growing network of the kind in its world. One is because we're really a counter community. You're joining a network that's really trying to really challenge the logic and really engage your thoughts and participation in building a new kind of academic community. But the other thing is we're an incomplete community, meaning that your voice and your participation helps our network not just grow, but brings in voices and perspectives that make us more complete. A network is a network because we're connected. No one is at the top, no one's at the bottom. So when you're looking for professional development opportunities, you're really joining a community in all kinds of ways. If you look at our mission on our website, we talk about leveraging the power of transnational connection to build communities that support the advancement of new generations of scholars working across borders. So I'm going to give you some opportunities, but realize that these are invitations to join different kind of communities, to find your own path, and to contribute your own voice. The first kinds of opportunities that we provide are mentoring opportunities. We have the Millennium Scholars Program. This is a way that we can build up new generations of scholars by pairing emerging scholars and young scholars with established scholars in different countries and contexts so that knowledge sharing can happen across borders and relationships can be formed, not just for that moment, but through a lifetime of scholarship. Together, they work on a piece of scholarship, they publish that scholarship in a peer-reviewed journal, and you get this lifelong mentoring relationship. Our publications work exactly the same way. Publications aren't just books in journals. Publications are conversations of communities. Our Star Scholars book series, not only do we publish our own books where you can serve as editors, authors, and reviewers, we partner with major publishing houses as well, like Springer and Routledge, ways to connect and broaden our community. So you can join those kinds of book projects by contributing chapters, but you can also join our Open Journals and Education Network. It's the largest network of its kind where you could join as an editor, an assistant editor, a reviewer, an author, and contribute your voice. The thing that makes this community powerful, it is 100% open access, which means it's free for all, free for everyone, forever, which means everyone around the world can access the knowledge that you create. Also, you can join our network through partnerships. We have regional directors and country directors across the globe that take our global movement and translate that into a local context. They don't just do that locally in their own community, they do that with other members of that country director and regional director network. That way there's transnational connections. We're bridging the local and the international together through the great leadership of our country and regional directors. And finally, our annual conference. This really brings the different types of knowledge communities together. So I just want to welcome you to our community. I want to invite you to this community as a counter movement, a different kind of community, and know that your voice is a part of us constructing an alternative future, one that we know is possible, but the one that we can only build if we work together to create that different version of a future for academic work.
And thank you very much, Chris. There's a lot more than Chris was able to cover in the short amount of time he was asked to take. Please go on the website and explore more of these opportunities. And even more importantly, the best opportunity is when you connect and collaborate through the network. And please create opportunities and give back to the community, including local, transnational, regional.
Oh, I'd actually like to raise another question for you. So I'm thinking, how could we as transnationally networked and collaborating scholars advance research that creates better balance of knowledge production and application for societies beyond the centers of power and resources?
Let me get this one started. Pursuing scholarship and advancing knowledge has also become entangled with a number of problematic trends and dynamics. One of them being the uneven production of knowledge in the world. Some parts of the world regionally and globally, let's say the global north, Western Europe and North America, versus the rest of the world. There's a lot of uneven knowledge production. But the problem with that is also what we call knowledge. If we simply call journal articles knowledge production, then we do have that imbalance of knowledge production. If we see who's citing whom, we can see a map that is very skewed also. If we see whose knowledge counts, what kinds of issues are being covered within the publication that is happening, that imbalance is so serious. And to aggravate that imbalance of knowledge production,
I kind of wanted to push back on this notion of knowledge production being centered in some locations and not the others. And I think really the question is not knowledge production, but really dissemination of the knowledge that's going to be produced. There are certainly parts of the world where publication is very difficult, but that doesn't mean that knowledge isn't being produced there. It just means that we have no access to it.
Yeah, thank you very much. As a librarian, that is an important point that you raised. I was also looking at not just knowledge production as in publishing, but dissemination. And yeah, and access. Without dissemination and access, and I would take it a step further, application of knowledge. Are we producing knowledge that is applicable and beneficial and relevant to the local society first? I would even bluntly state that it should be meaningful to the local society first, because that the second trend that I was talking about is the need for new scholarship. Chris already hinted at that challenge, which is to realign scholarship with the social mission of higher education, which is to advance the professions, to support the society, to better understand our histories and our issues, align with the economic and social and other progresses to uplift the lives of people. If it is not doing that, and a local small group of elite, especially in what we call the Global South, is engaging in this international English medium, very elite, very abstract knowledge, and getting rewarded for it, because our universities, as far as I know in the Global South, not yet taking that deliberate move to reward knowledge that is accessible to a local community, knowledge that is in other language, knowledge that is accessible and spread and applicable for the community. And these are because of certain dynamics, such as the systems that are entangled in colonial legacies of inequality and social and class and caste stratification. So scholars have the responsibility to not just chase their personal dream, but while chasing their personal dream, to also understand that they could be and should be making an impact in local society. So you will see this paradox. We are not saying that we should not pursue this English medium, international, individual rewards-based knowledge production. Please do that. But in doing so, don't see that it is mutually exclusive with the need for your society. The society is asking, waiting, pleading for you to do something about these diseases and agriculture and engineering and development and policy and history and economics. These should be brought together. As we publish globally, we should care locally to make knowledge meaningful and purposeful. As an editor of one of the star journals, I always see these scholars trying to cite only the scholars in Britain and in America, but not citing their own fellow scholars. Please cite your fellow scholars. We want to listen to the conversation on the ground, right? Even in international journals. Now, thinking about journals that you might need to develop, establish locally, you would need to advance that conversation, not to please some editor reviewer out there. In fact, we're not pleased that you're simply citing people far, far away. We are pleased when you cite scholars on the ground, when you address problems that are on the ground, that you do something good in your society. That is the more balanced, more spread, more equitable, more meaningful, more productive scholarship. And finally, I will just say that if we pay attention to the social accountability, academic integrity, and honesty, we will not only produce meaningful knowledge for our societies, but we'll also not do these amazingly bad things like ghostwriting or publishing in predatory journals and just bean counting, because it may feel good when you get it, but 20 years down the road, when people are looking at what we've published, people should be able to say that was meaningful research, it changed lives in society, it contributed to social justice, it helped save the planet. If, for example, I'm from Nepal, the mountains are melting. If a scholar of ecology, you're writing about some abstract thing somewhere else and citing other people, but not gathering the data and showing how to address this issue, then you're not doing justice to all of the millions of farmers, including maybe your own parents down the stream. You can not do global good without local good. It is not either or. It is only by addressing the necessary needs and opportunities, challenges of producing local knowledge for global good that we are going to advance the cause the STAR Network wants to advance, that Chris was talking about earlier.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate what you have outlined. I'd like, if you don't mind, to expand very briefly on what you've just said. One of the ways in which, to answer our colleague Michael's question, I would say that I like to recommend and remind us to decenter and to interrogate even the very terms we use. So I've had colleagues, myself included, who even say, why do we even use terms like knowledge production, for example, where in other cultures and languages, as you've noted, Sam, the word knowledge production is the word that we often use, but I would propose that it doesn't take into account the ways in which scholars of the global South think about or even talk about their work. I've met and worked with many scholars, and I think many of you here at the virtual round table and out listening to us, you probably have thought and resisted this idea of knowledge production, because I don't think our work should be seen or should be done in the university where we might risk being seen as just, if we're producing knowledge, as spaces for capitalist production of recycled ideas. When in other languages and cultures, the idea of the university is seen as more of a collaboratory, the kind of collaboratory that I think Chris was inspiring us at the beginning, spaces where we think of our scholarship not as, again, people top-downing it, but as storytellers telling stories about global challenges, creating spaces to think about how research and praxis are balanced, not just to quote unquote do, but to do for social impact. And then I just want to, 2 quick points. One way for us to do this is, again, as Sam, as you've said, to not just, interrogate our use of English, but to embrace the linguistic diversity that already exists in academic research. To Dennis's point, to recognize that it's there and that needs to be disseminated, shared, to recognize and in fact to speak of the limitations, the danger of the limitations of English as the only language in which we can conduct research, actively collaborating with colleagues who are working, writing, and researching in other languages to produce research that does and makes social impact, asking explicitly, making that part of the deliberate agenda. We're going to write an article, for example, Chris, and we're gonna work together, and when we're done, I'm gonna translate into Spanish, or I've got a colleague who's going to do so, for example. Research for personal gain or research for social impact, your gain can be the gain of others. And so it is not, as Sam has pointed out, a binary proposition. And finally, we need to embrace roles. Many of us are asked to take on what we consider small leadership roles or leadership agendas, and we think, those are minor decisions. Please note that many of the decisions that we make about our research in leadership roles are seemingly minor to us. We might think, that was a small decision, but they're decisions that make great impact. I will just give an example. At my university, I had the opportunity to make what was seemingly a small decision, but it will actually impact every single international and multilingual student in the university who is a teaching assistant. We are insisting on not having, for example, a exam that creates obstacles for transnational graduate scholars and that has them being seen as less than and takes away from their time and the energy that they have to do their work. So again, embracing leadership roles where you can make a significant difference and where you can challenge these centers of power. Please step up, please take on these leadership roles so that your research can be of greater impact.
Nella, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for kind of pushing back. Dennis pushed back earlier and Nella did again. It is exactly that kind of counter narrative that we need to create. And I hope when you listen to this conversation, you, our colleagues around the world, also push back some of these ideas. Knowledge production. What does it even mean? Is it just journal? Is it just indexing? Is it just citation? Is it just recycling? Do I need to cite the right people on a particular theory and then it is a journal article? But there's knowledge that is disseminating in the world under all circumstances in every society. We're all advancing, producing, disseminating, applying, sharing knowledge. In fact, the model that we talk about in our modules in this training, you might need to push back and say, no, that's not what we do. We produce and disseminate and share and apply our knowledge in very different forms. And please develop your local system that will recognize this. Please push back against the institutional leadership to say, look, this is the amount of amazing work that I do in order to improve education, life, society, and profession. This should be recognized. And it is when we all, wherever we live in America, in even there's a difference between North and South America and East and West America, we have to align our thinking and learning and teaching and sharing of knowledge to the realities. That's all we're saying. We're not saying oppose the global West or whatever. To the realities and needs of the people around us, to our own needs and our own situations. And once we align our work with our reality, we are doing justice in the world. It is because there is, alienation from our own reality. When we create this artificial form called knowledge that is respected, then things begin to go bad. Thank you very much for the pushback, and that's a right model and inspiration for other colleagues. Don't just listen to us, listen to the needs of the local society and your own understanding of where and how and why you're producing or disseminating knowledge. Thank you.
I'd like to pose a third question. How do we counter the neoliberal global dynamics that essentially advance an evolving neocolonial condition of global inequality? How can networked scholars influence institutional policies and publication practices and venues to stop undermining the social mission of research and scholarship in their own society in the first place, even as they may push scholars to produce more articles in international journals?
Well, I would like to respond to that. I am a participant of this program rather than an expert, meaning I'm an emerging scholar. So I hope that my sharing of experiences and perspectives here will inspire other participants who are relatively new. Since we are talking about the processes of publication, oftentimes the pressure of publication, neglecting the social mission of research, let me share with you the situation of my country. Publication is increasingly demanded in India. There is this undue pressure to publish in UGC care listed journals or Scopus indexed journals with high impact factor, but there is literally nothing to address the problem faced by scholars, no support systems. Little attention is paid to the very purpose of academic publication, as scholars are expected to publish in international venues, which in fact is one of the unfortunate reasons for the imbalance. To meet certain proxy measures of quality, such as citation index, instead of relevance to and impact on society. The push for knowledge production away from local venues and audiences are also prompting problematic responses from scholars, such as low originality in scholarship, plagiarized work, publishing in predatory journals, and many more. Universities are doing little to reward socially, especially locally valuable knowledge production, and by not doing so, they are reinforcing dependency on the terms set by the hegemony of the global north. As a result, the knowledge produced is of little value for global audiences and purposes as well, because the inquiry behind it is to have no roots in any ground. I had the good opportunity of participating in the South Asian Writing Group 2020 program, which helped me tremendously. It transformed my approach to research, writing, and teaching. I understood the way research about the local interest can be advanced while participating in and finding a voice in global platforms, and the way collaborative research work enhances interdisciplinary perspectives of understanding, fosters mutual accountability, social responsibility, and also the multiplied effects of collaborative support programs on research production and society. The program helped me shift my perspective and localize my research inquiries in terms of my own context and problems. I am working on a research project with the hope to advance scholarship and public discourse around gender-based violence in Indian society, specifically marital rape and the general rape culture in societies like mine. It opened doors for me of collaborating with colleagues, doing workshops, writing articles shaped by this perspective of addressing the local, and doing research which will create positive social impact. So I hope and wish that other participants of this program like me will be inspired to cultivate courage and perspective Focus on society will give opportunities to learn and grow and give back. It will open possibilities to pursue multiple tracks: academic discourse, publication, teaching and mentoring, public engagement in the form of op-eds, and community service. Also, what Krish was mentioning a little bit earlier, this kind of programs will also help to form an army of like-minded people who can challenge and resist the neoliberal culture of publish and perish, and collectively contribute to the valorization of new set of democratic value system about research and publication, with increasing focus on equality, equity, positive social impact, justice, establish friendships across the world, develop collaborative research networks and support systems in a way which will dismantle hegemony and promote positive changes in society.
And I certainly don't have anything to add to or embellish Pratyusha's really dynamic narrative and analysis, right? I can offer my own ideas to counteracting neoliberal global dynamics, which is, you got to admit, that's enormous. I think the way to counter anything large like that, anything seemingly overwhelming like that, I'm taking this idea from Edward Tufte, the idea of small multiples or many small multiples, thinking off of Nella's idea of small leadership roles that, direct an engaged scholarship, even like in a relatively, local or marginal way, can have an impact if it's accompanied by lots of other examples of that. One of the rationales behind that is that, ultimately as scholars, we can only really effectively research that which truly moves us, either emotionally or intellectually, right? I can talk all I want about Chevron doctrine, but really I find it kind of dry and boring, and I'm not going to be the best thinker on that. Somebody who really gets excited about that is going to offer more than I can. So what individual scholars need to do is to interpolate where their own interests meet actual needs, right? And that's the brass ring right there. Part of this involves invisible colleges and multiple invisible colleges. These writing groups are essential to developing scholarship, and it's the relationships that come out of those writing groups into editorial relationships, advisory relationships, mentorial relationships that create the unofficial or unorganized groups that help engage in this work, and ultimately, bring it back to teaching. If you have a point, you want to make sure you teach that point. You want to make sure you're researching that point. That's pretty much the best I could offer on what is an increasingly important question.
And thank you, Patricia. You really inspired me. You really outlined for our colleagues who are here at the virtual roundtable and also out in the world, our participants, how the program helped you begin to think about this question, and I appreciate that. And I think it was really interesting toward the end when you very clearly, I think also it was a good bridge to Dennis's comment that this is difficult work, but that we begin at the sort of grassroots level in our local communities, one deliberate, one thoughtful, one engaged act at a time. And as Dennis, I think, rightly points out, this may seem overwhelming, but we have all collectively at different times in our careers and professions and personal engagements seen and how these collaboratories do come together to resist and to enact change. So I want to thank you both for really being a sort of nice points, counterpoints, and your presentations from different perspectives. So thank you.
And if I can follow up, I remember last year at the annual conference that Noam Chomsky was talking not just about what this means for us as academics or what this means for knowledge, but really we do face existential crises where our planet is in peril. So changing the system is an existential issue for all of humanity, not just for scholars and how we think about this. I remember he said something to the effect that we're really just living through this confluence of crises And the way that we will find the answers to these existential crises are through internationalism, solidarity, and education. But the reality is we just don't have that much time. I remember he said very strikingly, this is the last generation that will face climate change, because either we will face climate change and climate disaster, or this will be the last generation. And so really the kinds of international cooperation that we're talking about have vast implications for the world. And I was really interested to hear what some of you thought about the ways in which we as scholars or researchers can be citizens of the world, and to think about the planetary elements, the ecological elements of our work in ways that we're not just accountable to each other as human beings, but we're accountable to all types of living life on planet Earth. We're accountable to future generations through the work that we're doing. I'd be really curious to hear what people think about this aspect of our conversation.
Well, so I know for me, the whole idea of being accountable, it's something that we all have to face. So it is definitely a shared responsibility. Everyone is going to be involved. Sometimes some people feel that doesn't impact them directly, but it does in a way. I mean, so everyone, it's our role, our job, our responsibility as educators, as scholars, as researchers. We understand what's happening, and then it's going to be up to us to spread the message around. I mean, so if we go back to climate change, I mean, the tragedy commons it's a common example that we think about. So the whole idea is everyone works together, everyone is able to live happily. But then there are always going to be groups that might be a little bit more selfish or feel that they are a bit more entitled. And then what happens there is then the entire system falls apart. And that's something that we need to strive against. I mean, so with the global climate change, it's something that we can't escape. Everyone's going to be affected by this. And then it's just not just going to be like increased hurricanes or more severe weather, hotter summers, colder winters. This has implications for health as well. It will affect food, water production, as well as what sort of clean sources we have. There's going to be supply issues. This is going to affect the entire ecology. Once the ecology gets affected, whole ecosystems will fail. That's going to cause humanity to starve. I mean, there's plenty of novels you can read and studies saying what will happen once ecosystems start to fail, like many doomsday stories. But what we as scholars, again, what we should be able to do is we should reach out. So we should start forming communities. We should go into our local communities, get involved with NGOs. The whole idea of public participation is something that we should try to get involved with. I mean, so public participation is created in the United States in the 1950s. It was pretty much implemented across all levels of the government. And the whole idea behind this was that the public could have their voices heard, and that they would be able to create something that's a bit more democratic, as well as a bit more equal and equitable for everyone living. So in terms of getting our knowledge across, we know the knowledge by speaking out at public meetings, at public hearings. We can share what we know. We can let the other citizens become informed. We can do our best to inform the lawmakers and the decision makers. So they are experts in their own field, but then we are going to be experts in our field. We understand what will happen, and then we will be the ones that people will turn to eventually to find out how to proceed. So again, my final message is just I feel we need to be the ones that get involved actively. We can't just sit around. We have great publications building up behind us, but then what good is it? Like, so what? We're brilliant researchers, but now it's time for us to act and to make sure that we can make a change in society.
I agree 100% with what Chris and Michael are saying. It's also really important somehow, and I don't know how, human psychology takes bad news and puts it aside. It's in our natural instinct when we hear really bad news to compartmentalize it. That's how we get through a series of crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. By the same token, you do enough of that compartmentalizing, and there are serious mental health implications for every one of us. I think that the message is right, but it's also got to be somehow inspiring in a strange way. And that's what I don't know. That's the bridge that I don't know how to get an inspiring message out of the end of the world, really.
What a thought-provoking question there. We'll leave it for everybody to try to answer that question through the research and the application of your research. Laura, there's a second dimension to this. One is the ecological crisis that we all face. If we say only the ecology department will fix it, no way. All of us, from those who teach communication to those who teach research, to those who teach medicine, to those who teach geography, would all have to chip in and contribute if we were to save this planet, right? But then there's also the second dimension of social justice when it comes to language, when it comes to culture, when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to people, unequal participation. What are some ways in which, with any example that you can give from your own research, you could also advance social justice while advancing your own professional career through publication?
The fact that Nella brought up the idea of counter-narrative and how important it is. In my particular research, I historicize the colonial impact of English on academic discourse. So that the act of seeing histories of oppression and cynical politics and how they've built the academic genres and the languaging that we use in our research. If we do this kind of historicizing, if we name these histories of oppression, we can sometimes open pathways for naming histories that have become invisible. And that's a really important act to do with English because it is so naturalized and so expected in so many places where we're producing and researching. So I think that the idea of historicizing, writing counter narratives to the history of academic discourse, examining that oppressive sort of network of histories, examining it closely, is a way to sort of establish a ground floor, a platform for your work. I think that we act from a place of clear knowledge about the global dynamics around us that might be impacting the dissemination of our research, or might be impacting the way we produce research. I think that understanding the invisible networks of those oppressive histories is an important platform to work from.
What a wonderful point you raised. And I want other colleagues to also, in starting to wrap up, add any points you have. But I was thinking, Laura, that if there's a scientist out there, let's say they study mining, it would be easy to say, I study gold or I study silver, right? And I study how to mine more. But wouldn't you think that has to do with whose lands are mined, who gets ownership to that land, who gets benefit out of it? If you think that it's for the social scientists to come later on the next day and explore, you're not doing the science right. Because at the end of the day, that scientific question of what, where, when, how, who, whom is the broader context in which you ought to be doing the science. If you don't do that, you would be either maintaining a status quo of imbalance and injustice and harm, or you're actually advancing that while denying that you are participating in it. And that is exactly where, when science and society, when economics and society, when history and society, when language and society, in fact, I would urge that scientist to look into the 50-year history of that mining business in that particular context, where they're doing the mining research. And you would find out by simply researching the 50-year history of that project, how much harm has been caused and why you should or should not be doing that research in the same way, or you could be doing it in a different way. Now, you could come up with any number of examples, like going to the countryside and finding out bridge building for an engineer. Where are the bridges built and why? Why are the bridges lasting and not lasting? Why would you build a bridge where there's one is not needed? Why would you be the expert on bridge building where the bridges are built to nowhere, right? It is that question that you go to sleep and feel good about or not that we are asking. Is it socially just? Is it socially productive? Is it economically, but also ecologically productive? If you're harming the environment, what is the good of you advancing the science and getting a career? At the end of your career, you should be able to look back and say, I did great science, but I also did great good. All of us are simply asking that question, which is the counter narrative of scholarship we're bringing up here, the socially just and environmentally accountable scholarship.
I'd like to say something. Thank you, Sam. I'll just say something very brief with respect to the question of our responsibilities, because we like to speak about rights when we deploy a rights-based lens, but we often don't speak about responsibility. And I really appreciate Michael and Chris and their focus and reminding us of how we, our accountability to the planet. I propose that for all of us, all of our participants from the Global South, it is exactly our citizens from the Global South who traditionally have had their cultures, their languages, and their narratives silenced, ignored, repressed, and even endangered. And it is from the Global South that we have learned that to expand the idea of the world. In Western context, the world is usually just us humans. And Chris and Michael are reminding us that in fact, when we think about being a global citizen, we must speak about our responsibility to the globe, to the environment. Things that these notions are central to the thinking of many languages and cultures around the world, not so central to the West. And so I literally would say that it's that the more monolingual English-speaking, Western-centric research we have out there, the more we will shift the narrative to the ways I think in which we've thought in the past about the value and the importance of honoring, respecting of other living entities that are not just the human or fellow living elements of the environment. And I think it's really important for us to think about the role that we have as people from other spaces, languages, cultures in which the environment is a central part of our common humanity.